Hello and welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name's Joe Nicholson and I'm joined by my fellow Sunderland writer, James Copley, for our regular Monday podcast. Of course, we're going to be looking back on Friday's 1-0 defeat against Hull City at the Stadium of Light, the backlash towards head coach Michael Beale, which followed after the game, and also the latest transfer news with just under 2 weeks of the window remaining. James, it's been a few days now since that game against Hull, and it felt like a really damaging night for Sunderland. All the frustration that we've kind of seen in recent weeks, the debacle around the Newcastle game with the Black Cats bar, the decision to sack Tony Mowbray, not being able to sign a striker so far this month, it all kind of seemed to come to a head on Friday night, and those chants against Michael Beale, chanting you're getting sacked in the morning from the Sunderland fans. So just how damaging a night do you think it was, looking back now a few days on, and how damaging do you think it's going to be now moving forward for the rest of the season?
I think it'll be, it's damaging for him. I know wise men say the Sunderland fan podcast ran a poll, and I think it was 91% of Sunderland fans wanted Michael Beale sacked. That's after 7 games. 3,000 people voted in that poll. There was also the bailout hashtag, which was trending quite high up the charts last night on Twitter. So there's clearly some pretty strong feelings there. Is it fair after 7 games? I think from an outsider's perspective, you would look in and say that he hasn't been given enough time. But I think Sunderland have regressed pretty starkly in that time, in those 7 games. We shouldn't rewrite history. Maybe Sunderland were on the slide under Tony Mowbray. You know, he wasn't exactly doing well, but had he earned the right to maybe get through to the rest of the season or get through another January transfer window? Probably, for me. Again, let's not rewrite history and say that every Sunderland fan wanted Tony Mowbray to stay, because there was a significant portion that wanted Tony Mowbray gone. But when Tony Mowbray went, I think there was an acceptance that Sunderland were going to try and advance the club with a young, bright head coach, somebody exciting, a potential unknown. And it's been well reported that they had flirtations with Will Still, but they wouldn't pay the compensation fee. So Sunderland have gone and done what they've done the last 2 times the managerial vacancy has been vacant, and they've gone with what they say is the best candidates in the free agent market. And that helps sort of strengthen the narrative that, Sunderland are doing things on the cheap, all of that sort of thing, that they're not willing to spend money. Michael Beale comes from a big club in Rangers, having not set the world alight. And Sunderland fans aren't daft. People say about his win percentage at Rangers. There's 2 things matter at Rangers, and that's winning trophies and beating Celtic. And unfortunately, he couldn't do either. It didn't help that he got beat 4-0 in his first game against Coventry. There was chance for Tony Mowbray during that game. And the form hasn't been good. It's been patchy. The Newcastle United game, the debacle around that, I think, is contributing to the bad mood. But in terms of Michael Beale, take that game in isolation. Sunderland didn't really offer much. We expected, hopefully, they could be in the game for a bit longer. They were expected to lose, but sort of tactically, we're not seeing what we thought we were going to from Michael Beale. Christian Speakman in that first press conference said it was some of the best training sessions he's ever seen, and I've no doubt that he's he is a good coach, and he's good on the training field. He's of Liverpool and Chelsea stock, but his best work so far really in football has come as a number 2. He had a brief period as a number 1 with QPR, and he was doing okay there, although they did start to slide. So I can understand Sunderland fans' frustration. I think it's 2 big games coming up now against Stoke and Middlesbrough. But yeah, those chants were very damaging. And that game as well, you were just watching it and you just knew Sunderland weren't going to do anything. Yes, they had possession. Yes, they had more shots than Hull City. But you could just tell a mile off that it was never... They were never going to get anything out of that game, really, despite it being fairly even for large parts of it. You just got the impression, really, that if anybody was going to score, it was going to be Hull City. And of course, Michael Beale addressed those chants towards him after the game and mentioned that Sunderland fans should get behind the team, which has gone down pretty badly because Sunderland fans always tend to get behind the team. And actually, those chants weren't directed at the team. They were directed at Michael Beale. I do feel sorry for him in some respects. He is human. He's had a tough start to life of his Sunderland career, but it's going to be very, very, very tough for him to bounce back. And when there is this strength of feeling towards a manager, it never really equates to long-term success. The two that spring to my mind are Phil Parkinson. He did badly to start with, then he did okay, and then he was eventually sacked. Simon Grayson. That didn't go too well. I think it's very hard to recover once these things have happened. And, I hope he does recover, and I hope Sunderland beat Stoke, and I hope Sunderland beat Middlesbrough, but it's hard to see at the moment. But stranger things have happened, of course. I think the thing is, Joe, that Michael Beale's on a 2.5-year contract. So it's an interesting situation from a club point of view as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you mentioned there, some of the former managers, and you do kind of get an impression when it's going to be very hard for the managers to come back. And it felt like on Friday night it's going to be very difficult for Michael Beale to come back from that. And as I mentioned at the start, I think it's a factor of things that have led to this frustration with the whole thing around the Newcastle game, with the lack of signings, with the fact that Tony Mowbray was sacked and not everyone agreed with that decision. So Michael Beale came in and he almost wasn't at neutral. He was, he had something to prove already. So yeah, and we are only 7 games in, and it does seem harsh for these chances to be happening. But if you look at the kind of performances in recent weeks, I've spoke to some of the players in recent weeks. I spoke to Dan Neil after the Ipswich game and asked what kind of changes have we seen under Michael Beale. And he said there's been a lot more focus out of possession, or more focus out of possession than in possession compared to Tony Mowbray. I then put that to Luke O'Nien at the weekend after the game against Hull on Friday, and he kind of said something similar. And if you look at the stats, Sunderland are creating less chances under Beale. You look at their XG in the last few games. The whole game, their XG was 0.77. The Ipswich game, 0.48. The Preston game, which they won 2-0, 0.94. And Sunderland's XG on average has been around 1.68. So that includes the games that Tony Mowbray was in charge. Now, of course, there were some games where, similar to Friday night under Mowbray, remember the Huddersfield game where they lost 1-0 at the Stadium of Light, the Cardiff game similar. So it wasn't all completely clicking under Mowbray, but it does seem like under Beale, there's been this more pragmatic approach, but it's not getting the results which they'd have hoped for, which kind of goes against the kind of structure that Sunderland have been talking about, the hierarchy, that we have a style of play. If one head coach leaves, we'll bring in another head coach that has a similar style of play. And it seems like under Beale, there's kind of been a bit more of a pragmatic approach, and it's also not been getting results, which has been costly in the last few weeks.
It's definitely more pragmatic, but the thing is, if you're going to be, I think the thing with the Sunderland fans is if you're going to be knocking on the playoffs, if you're going to be around 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th place, then you may as well play some exciting football. It does count for a lot stylistically. Fans pay a lot of money. I understand it's nice to get clean sheets. Go back to Sam Allardyce, always respect the point, all that sort of stuff. You do need to be defensively sound. I'm all for, without the ball, out of possession work. It is important, but watching Sunderland is a tough sell at the moment. But I think obviously a lot of the responsibility has fallen on Michael Beale's shoulders. And rightly so to a degree, because Sunderland have regressed. It's clear. The numbers bear it out, and all the numbers that you mentioned in terms of XG, and also just the general eye test. You can see they're not as good, they're not as exciting. There's something missing. But you do also have to look at Michael Beale's squad. Those shortcomings in that squad have been there. Should he be doing better? Yes, but that squad needs a refresh, and it needs some added quality. It needs some added experience. It needs a centre midfielder who can play as a 6 to add tactical variety. It needs a goal scorer. You could argue it needs somebody with a bit of stardust like Ahmad as well. There's a lot at play at Sunderland, and I think he is copping a little bit of flack. Not that people are blaming him for the Newcastle United debacle in terms of the off-field matters, but it's almost like a perfect storm, Joe, isn't it? As you mentioned, all of that stuff, he's sort of not guilty by association because none of it's his fault. None of that's even Christian Speakman's fault. But when you've got the team not performing on the pitch, that falls at Michael Beale's door. You've got a squad that needs a refresh, which falls at Christian Speakman's door. And you've got a Newcastle United ticketing debacle and a commercial shambles at the club, which falls at ownership and the chief operating officer. So you do have that sort of triumvirate perfect storm, and it's all contributing towards a backlash. And rightly so, I would say. I think there's many facets to it. Not necessarily all of it is Michael Beale's fault, but the bit that he can affect, the bit on the pitch, he's not doing good enough. And you have to say, Christian Speakman, again, this is a conversation for another podcast, but Christian Speakman, I think by and large, has done very well at Sunderland. And I think where Sunderland have fallen down has been the last window. Some of these players that he's brought in clearly weren't ready to contribute immediately. They may well become good players for Sunderland, some of them. In fact, I've got no doubt some of them will, but we just haven't hit the ground running in terms of signings. The parameters have gone too much towards, youth and inexperience, where really, getting rid of Gooch and getting rid of Danny Bard, I think they could have contributed. I think their experience would have been invaluable in some of these games. People might disagree with that. That's fine. Leaders on and off the pitch, I think is really important with a young group. So there's all that at play as well. And yeah, Michael Beale's copping most of the flack for it at the moment, but there's a fair amount for Kira Louis-Dreyfus and a fair amount for Christian Speakman as well. And even looking at Christian Speakman, he's limited in what he can do in the transfer market because Kira Louis-Dreyfus sets the budgets because it's his club. So it's a very interesting situation at Sunderland at the moment. And of course, we're all waiting for that red and white army minutes to get a little bit more clarity on off-field matters. So it's just incredible, Joe. We've obviously covered this club for a long time, and the pace at which it can all turn south, which has been a couple of months, is incredible, really.
Well, we'll come on to transfers later in the podcast. We'll just talk about, as you said, what Michael Beale can control, the decisions that he made before Friday's game. He recalled Nazir Rusin up front after he'd dropped to the bench for the Ipswich game. Abdullah Bar dropped out of the side, and also Adjalisi was unavailable. So we've got to kind of factor in that there has been some injuries for Sunderland. Elise being unavailable, Sirkin unavailable, and Huggins has left a big gap at left back where Humes had to move across, and then Jensen Seelt came in at right back. Also, Patrick Roberts has been a big loss as well, which it felt on Friday night with Pritchard going out to the right-hand side, Seelt coming in at right back. It was very much reliant on Jack Clark on the other side. It was very narrow. There was not a lot of width in the side, and that kind of made it easier for Hull to kind of keep Sunderland at arm's length. But what did you kind of make of the decisions that Beale made on Friday, dropping Barr as well, who I thought had a decent game at Ipswich, bringing Rusin back into the side? It seems like he's chopping and changing a bit, which doesn't seem to kind of be helping the kind of flow of the team. James, I think your mic's just stopped working.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think we're back on. You might be the start of that answer. We can't hear you again now.
How about now?
Yeah, try now. I think we're good now. Apologies for the interruption.
Yeah. Anyway, where did I get to?
We're just talking about the changes that Beale made on Friday, dropping Barr out of the side, bringing in Rusin, and what he kind of the tactics he kind of deployed on Friday night.
Yeah. So, right, where was I? Yeah, I think did you hear the Alex Pritchard bit or not?
Well, start from the Alex Pritchard bit.
So the Alex Pritchard bits, I think starting him on the right, it does provide problems because he drifts inside so much. He starts playing as a number 10 a little bit more. Ruson's been in and out of the side. It is very difficult tactically. I actually thought against Hull City, Pritchard drifting in offered Sealt a lot of purchase on the right-hand side. He was a lot of space, but he's not an attacking right back, so it's very, very difficult for him to sort of affect the game. So it's a struggle tactically, but then again, does he really have the players on the bench to change it who are sort of oven ready to come in and affect the game? So tough sell. Again, it's tough to watch Sunderland at the moment. Tactically, it's not really working. I think we all thought Michael Beale would be a bit more pragmatic, and perhaps he is, but I think we all thought he might be able to get a tune out of this Sunderland side tactically, and we might win a few more marginal games, but it's actually gone the other way, which is interesting. So yeah, it's tough, but again, he needs help in January. He really, really does need some help in January, as Tony Mowbray would have needed help in January. So it's like the chicken and the egg at the moment. Saying that, he should definitely be doing better with the tools at his disposal, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll come on to January now. Then Sunderland have kind of made it clear, and Beale's kind of said in press conferences over the past few weeks that a striker is kind of the priority, and it seems like Sunderland are maybe prepared to alter their approach to bring in a striker that's maybe a bit older, a bit more experienced, and that can come in and be the here and now and affects things immediately, rather than being someone that's ready in 2-3 years' time, as they kind of look to do in the summer. So the striker seems to be the priority, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast. Central midfield, we've said for I don't know how many transfer windows at Sunderland seem light in central midfield and have lacked that kind of number 6 to kind of come in, especially when Corey Evans picked up his injury now a year ago. And it also seems like they're short at left back, given the injuries to Sirkin, to Huggins, Humes having to move across, and they're having to move Sealt across and out of position. So there's 3 positions straight away that you feel that Sunderland probably need to strengthen in January. And I'm not sure they're going to. Do you think they're going to bring in 3 players before now and the end of the window on the 1st of February?
It doesn't look likely at the moment, does it? Obviously, the transfer window's incredibly slow, I think, for everybody, Championship, Premier League included. We're sort of all waiting for those first few dominoes to start. And then, hopefully stuff will progress. Sunderland will be linked with a fair few players. I think the problem Sunderland have is that everybody knows what they need and what they want. Everybody knows that they need a striker. Everybody knows that they probably need a centre midfielder. In January, you have to pay a premium to get players, especially experienced players, especially players that are going to be able to come in and make an impact. So Christian Speakman's got a job on his hands. To negate that, Kirill Dreyfus might need to put his hand in his pocket. Will he do that? I don't know. Will they break with a model? And there's a lot of talk about breaking with a model. I don't think it needs scrapping by any means. I think that for large parts of it, it's been good. It just needs the parameters adjusting a little bit. And I think that's part of life. You have to be, we're talking about pragmatism, but you do have to change a little bit as well. Just because something's worked well for a year, 6 months, just because it's got you out of League One, doesn't mean you have to rigidly stick to that. You can make subtle little tweaks here and there to improve things. There can be some flexibility. Nobody's saying let's scrap all the good work that's been done at the academy. Nobody's saying let's stop playing young players. Nobody's saying let's not try and pick up Dennis Sirkin or try and pick up Adji Alisi or Niall Huggins or Trey Hume or the Ross Stewarts of this world, people like that. Nobody's saying let's not use the loan market smartly. All people are saying is, could we just add some experience and a striker here and a fully fleshed out squad? We've sort of been through this first phase, and I think, it is time for it to be moved up a level, possibly. Is this a transition season? It wasn't really presented to us as such at the beginning of the season. And if it was a transition season, then why sack Tony Mowbray? Because he was doing a reasonable job. So it's a weird one. This is now Sunderland's longest time spent outside the top division in its entire history. So you can understand why Sunderland fans would prefer the club to get there. That's not arrogance. That's just Sunderland fans wanting the best for their club. They want to compete at the top end of the Championship. They want to, try and get to the Premier League. That should be the aim of every Championship team with ambition, which is what Kirill Dreyfus has said Sunderland have now, is ambition. So I think for me, as I say, Michael Beale needs help. Nobody's saying go out and break the bank. I don't think anybody's saying that either. But I think this strategy does need to be moved along a little bit. And, there's Ross Stewart money sat there as well. There's going to be Clark money at some point. Again, nobody's saying break the bank on wages either, but can they do something in January? Yes, it's notoriously hard, but, can we go and get a Kiefer Moore, really lay a marker down and try and get something? And there's lots to consider with transfers. Is Kiefer Moore the right fit for Sunderland on and off the field as well? I do think that's important. But yeah, it's been a pretty dull January so far, and unluckily for us, as Phil mentioned last week, it's probably all going to come down to deadline day. We're probably going to be scrambling around for a lot of last minute things, as will other clubs as well. And that's just sort of the way it goes.
As you mentioned there, I think the transfer approach in previous windows has been very admirable, and Sunderland have made some excellent signings. You look at people like Tri Hume, like Dennis Sirkin, like Adjulisi, Pierre Equar, that they've picked up for very low fees, and other clubs didn't want these players, and Sunderland have done well to bring them in, and they've proved to be very good signings. But I think last season they kind of had almost like a perfect balance, didn't they? With like your experienced players in there, with your Danny Bart, with your Lyndon Gooch. Corey Evans was obviously there in the first half of the season, and it seemed there was a good balance between the experienced players and the younger players coming through. Whereas now it seems to have gone very far the other way towards the younger players. Sunderland have allowed people like Bart, like Gooch, people that were very influential in the dressing room to move on, and it now feels like when the team are going through a tough period, who's going to be the ones to kind of step up and really take the teams through that. I mean, we get a player after every game, and we got Luke O'Nien on Friday after the whole game, and you really didn't see who else it was going to be. It could have been kind of the club put a player up after every game, and last week it was Dan Neil, who's a very good talker, and I think a very good is a leader in the team at still a very young age. You forget how young he kind of is, the way he talks and how well he speaks, but it's kind of, you knew it was going to be Dan Neil or Luke O'Nien coming out to face the press because they couldn't put anyone else. They couldn't put up one of the younger players. But in terms of other players coming in, Sunderland have been linked with Jan and Villa. Phil, our colleague, asked Michael Beale about him after the game on Friday, and he kind of dismissed those rumours. So doesn't look like maybe that one's going to happen. But where else do you think Sunderland do need to bring players in? We've mentioned centre midfield, we've mentioned left back, mentioned up front. What should be now the priority? If Sunderland could bring in one or two players to this squad, who would you like to come in, and where do you think needs addressing the most?
I think position-wise, you've nailed it. Perhaps some cover for the left and right back spot. If I'm being greedy, a defender in the Danny Barth ilk. I thought letting him go was a strange decision at the time, and I think it's proved to be so. I know Sunderland want to play out from the back, and Luke O'Nien's numbers in terms of playing the ball out for the back are actually quite good. So I do get that argument. But as you actually mentioned, Joe, rather than positions, which I think are obvious, I think for me it's about experience and know-how. Just in life generally, we say, looking back to when we got our jobs at the Echo, obviously you were 6 months in before me, but if you'd have just sort of catapulted us into those roles, and we didn't have, the guidance of the lads that had been there for a couple of years or our bosses, like, we wouldn't have known what to do. You don't sort of learn your trade instantly. It does take time, and you do learn by looking at other people as well, and people telling you, you need to do this. It's about experience. As I say, I don't think anybody is suggesting that we just scrap having young players at the club, because they've provided us with some absolutely amazing stories. But it's just missing. It is missing that experience at the moment, and that's what I'd like to see rectified. And it's just a shame, really, because progress for progress' sake sometimes means you don't progress at all. And I think that's what actually happened in the summer with Gooch and Bath. I know fans can argue about Gooch's impact at Stoke and Bath's impact at Norwich, but when there were Sunderland players, they contributed and they did well for us. Particularly Gooch having the know-how and passion of somebody who's been at the club for so long. Did contribute on the pitch as well, was versatile, and just somebody who can say, well, this is what it means to play for Sunderland. I think that's really important. Obviously, you have that with O'Nien and Patterson and Neil to a degree, but you definitely had that with Gooch, who had seen it all. He'd played in the Premier League for Sunderland, Championship, League One. So I think keeping him around for a little bit longer would have helped. Would he have stayed? Would Sunderland have offered him a long-term deal? Probably not. So there's all that to consider as well. But it's just a shame for me that we actually had a couple of these players that we actually require now, and they've gone. So anybody you bring in has to hit the ground running. They don't really have the opportunity of having 6 months to get reacquainted and learn about playing for Sunderland. So, yeah, tough.
Yeah, I think it's just about losing players like Gooch and Bath, they obviously weren't going to be regular first team players, and Sunderland have kind of had the policy in the last few years, if you're not going to be a first team, we are going to let you go and pursue other opportunities. But it's the fact that they didn't replace them.
It is interesting that, though, because if you have Danny Bart in the squad, does that mean that when required, when you're playing a big team, that you can have Bath in there, you can shift Luke O'Neill to fullback? Maybe some Sunderland fans would like him in field. Gooch gives you a similar option, could play right centre back with the injuries to Huggins and Sergen.
Gooch would have played on Friday, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. It would have afforded that a little bit more tactical flexibility. It might mean that Jensen Seelt could have played at centre back at some point in his Sunderland career as well, because now he's playing right back out of position. So there's all that to consider as well. And as I say, these aren't majorly horrendous decisions, and I can actually see the logic behind them. Obviously, Danny Bath was getting on a bit. Lyndon Gooch had been at the club for a long time. Did they want to commit to a long-term deal? I do understand all these arguments, but on the flip side, you do have to be careful what you wish for. And I think that's actually true with Tony Mowbray as well. Sometimes you don't actually realise and understand what you've got until it's gone.
Mm-hmm. We are recording this on Facebook Live and just getting a few comments as well. One thing we haven't touched on yet, Alex Pritchard's contract and transfer rumours. There's been a few links in kind of the last few days and weeks. Reports that Birmingham are interested. There's also reportedly interest from abroad. And as we've said before, Sunderland were very prepared to let Pritchard go last summer. Tony Mowbray said that in press conferences, and he was expected to leave the club. Didn't start many games at the start of this season, but he has come in recent weeks and he's been a key player for Sunderland. What do you see now with him? Because if Sunderland were to let him go, they would need to replace him. He's another experienced player. He's 30, probably the oldest player playing regularly now in the squad. And I think if Pritchard was to go as well, that's another vocal member of the dressing room going out of the squad. So if he did leave in January, I think the club would need to replace him. Doesn't sound like there's any indication of him getting offered a new contract before next summer, before this summer coming up even, when he would be free to leave the club. So what do you kind of make of his situation as things stand at the minute?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful what you wish for again when it comes to players like Pritchard, a great servant for Sunderland, joined us in League One, helped us get promoted. He's one of the only players in the squad, I think possibly maybe the only player in the squad with a bit of Premier League experience as well, comes with great pedigree. Obviously was bought for a lot of money. Yes, during his time at Sunderland, he has been in and out of the squad, or in and out of the first team. At times, he's been a little inconsistent, but I think generally, Sunderland fans would agree that he's for the most part contributed quite well in terms of goals and assists. Always tries to do something. I think he set standards. I remember actually there was a game when we were in League One. I think we drew with Wickham. Was it 3-3?
Yeah, at Wickham.
Pritchard was fuming, absolutely fuming that Sunderland had thrown that game away. It was under Johnson or was it under Neil? I can't remember which one it was.
That was Johnson. That was under Johnson. Yeah,
a Johnson game. And he was absolutely fuming that day and really upset. And he does drive standards, experienced professional, very good person to have around the dressing room, and he contributes on the field. But this is this situation's of Sunderland's design, really. I can't see him signing a new deal. Apparently, contract talks haven't even opened yet. So I think they're just going to have to take the medicine with this one and accept that they're going to come in for a little bit of flack. Obviously, Pritchard's going to be playing for his next club now, isn't he? Really, he's going to be putting himself in the shop window. There's going to be interest. I think what's really interesting in the minds of fans as well is that Tony Mowbray wasn't playing Pritchard, and now suddenly Tony Mowbray's gone to Birmingham.
Yeah.
And now he wants Alex Pritchard at Birmingham. So that, I think, tells you sort of where Tony Mowbray was at with Alex Pritchard. And he made some interesting comments about, team selection and not feeling that he could play Alex Pritchard as much as he would like to. It's been good, this podcast, hasn't it? Me calling Alex Pritchard Alex Neil and me mic not working. Anyway, so there's all of that in the minds of fans as well. Personally, I think he should have been offered a new deal in the summer. And I think he's probably going to leave on a free transfer in next summer. I can't see him leaving in January. I think it would be foolish to leave him in January. Yeah. As you say, Joe, unless Sunderland got a good replacement. But then again, you do have to bed in that new replacement as well. So you're going to have an experienced player who knows the club, who's up to speed, leave, and then potentially somebody who isn't ready to start games, depending on who it is, come in. And that could cause problems as well. So Yeah, it's the January transfer window.
Mm.
It's fraught with complications.
I think there's just too many areas that need addressing to let someone like Alex Pritchard go, and similar with Jack Clark. Obviously, there's Premier League interest in him, but as we've mentioned before, Sunderland probably need a left back. They probably need a centre midfielder. Probably need a striker. If you take Alex Pritchard out or one of the attacking players, then you need another creative player or another winger, and it just seems, I think wouldn't make sense to sell someone like Alex Pritchard in January without a replacement lined up. And just a few comments that you've put on the screen there. One comment saying Chris Rigg should be given a chance in the last 10 minutes. As we mentioned before, Sunderland do lack options in centre midfield as well. And there's been a lot of kind of responsibility on Dan Neil and Pierre-Emerick this season. Another comment saying, should Jewison Bennett get a chance? A player that we've hardly seen this season in the first team. And now Patrick Roberts out injured and Barr seems to be the preference there, or Pritchard playing out on the right. Do you think some of these younger players should have been given a chance? Of course, we don't see them day in, day out in training, but Chris Rigg, remember, is only still 16, so he's still incredibly young, but he has kind of held his own when he has been given little cameos in the first team. Michael Beale's spoken a few times about maybe letting some of the younger players leave on loan. He's mentioned Hemir and Bennett as well, was mentioned when Mike Dodds was in charge. So are there any of these fringe players, younger players, that you think deserve to have been given more of a chance?
I think with Chris Rigg, we'll just tackle that first. I think it's a really interesting case because he is so highly rated and Sunderland fought so hard to keep him. And it was seen as such a good thing that Sunderland had kept Chris Rigg, and rightly so. Youngest ever outfield player for Sunderland as a 15-year-old, played against Premier League Fulham, didn't look out of place last season. This season, maybe fans are expecting Chris Rigg to kick on a little bit. It is worth noting he's only 16 and he scored against Crewe Alexander, Sunderland's youngest ever goal scorer. Scored against Southampton. I think he's played 8 or 10 times this season.
It can be very different, though, can't it? Starting a game compared to coming off that 20 minutes.
This is it. And I think because we've been told so much about Chris Rigg and we've seen glimpses of how good he can be, there is a little bit of a clamour for him. And understandably so, when Sunderland's team isn't sort of functioning well, you want that little bit of stardust, that little bit of fearlessness that he would undoubtedly bring. But it is worth noting that he is 16. You don't want to throw him to the Wolves. He's had that first team experience. He's dropped out a little bit. He's playing for the under-18s in the Youth Cup. He's playing for the under-21s as well. By all accounts, he's completely tenacious in training when he's with the 18s and 21s and in those games with the 18s and 21s, still training with Sunderland's first team as well. So second half of the season, when the stakes are a little bit less perhaps with Sunderland, I don't know, you would hope that he'd get played a little bit more. He's probably, let's not forget either that he stayed at Sunderland probably to play games for the first team as well. That's the allure that he's going to get looked after. So at some point, he is going to have to play more games. Otherwise, I think the player will get frustrated. But you do have to be careful. You don't want to throw him in. You don't want to hang him out to dry. You don't want to bring him into an environment where the team's really struggling and then his confidence is crushed. As you say, it's very different coming on for the last 10, 15 minutes to starting games in the Championship. In regards to some of the other players, Jefferson Bennett doesn't seem to have had much luck for Sunderland. He got that assist for Chris Rigg's goal against Southampton when he came on, looked very good, but then he struggled with injuries, illness. He's in the 21s, he's out the 21s. He was in the squad a couple of weeks ago. Now he's dropped out the squad again, back in, back out. I think he's probably massively frustrated. It's a tough environment to come into as a youngster who doesn't speak the language. Does he need a loan? He probably needs to play regularly. The noises coming out of his camp suggest he would prefer a loan. It's very hard for him to get in over Jack Clark anyway. We have to note that because Jack Clark's so good that he plays 90 minutes unless Sunderland are 3 or 4-0 up, which is unlikely at the moment. But then if Jack Clark gets injured, then, who comes in for him? God forbid. Yeah. So these are all little transfer decisions that Sunderland are facing. Hemir, I thought, actually looked quite good when he came on against Hull in his brief cameo. He looks like he's dropped a few pounds. He looked a bit more mobile, and he did put himself about a little bit as well. So that's an interesting one. What's going to happen with him and Mayenda? There's little things.
Beale said Mayenda's probably going to stick around, isn't he?
Well, yeah,
but Hemir is open to a loan.
I was just about to mention that in a sense that I think Sunderland fans are struggling with those comments because Mayenda scored 2 for the under-21s, doesn't make the matchday squad, whereas Hemi is probably going to go out on loan and then makes the matchday squad and gets on. So there's all that sort of stuff in the background as well. Other players, could we see somebody like Ellis Taylor going out on loan potentially? I know Harry Gardner's already gone, maybe Michael Spellman or something to the National League. But it will be interesting in terms of outgoings, I think, for Sunderland this winter window.
Well, Beale did say that they probably wouldn't sanction any loan deals unless someone is brought in. For example, Hamir is not going to go out on loan if Sunderland aren't able to bring a striker in. So a very busy kind of few weeks coming up. And next up for Sunderland, it's another home game against Stoke. Then they go away to Middlesbrough the following weekend. But it goes without saying, huge game this weekend, isn't it? At home, back at the Stadium of Light. And if Sunderland don't get a result again, you fear that there's going to be a similar reaction to after the whole game.
No, there absolutely will be. I think this is a crucial couple of games coming up for Michael Beale, as we mentioned at the top end of the podcast. Stoke City at home, given their fortunes over recent seasons, I know it's improved since Stephen Schumacher's come in. But if he loses against Stoke and Middlesbrough, or has anything other than convincing wins, really, it's going to be very difficult, because I think Sunderland fans need to see improvement in terms of the structure, in terms of the intensity, in terms of the game plan, and results as well. That's the position he finds himself in. Sunderland need results, and Sunderland fans also need to be shown that there's something there that they can get behind. And I think just in terms of the next two games as well, Stoke City, Middlesbrough, Stephen Schumacher, Michael Carrick, both highly rated coaches. And, if they get one over on Michael Beale, who's been perceived as this, young up-and-comer, it's going to be very, very difficult for him again. So, yeah, all eyes in the next two games, really.
We'll have more build-up to that game against Stoke at the Stadium of Light on Saturday. And if you like what we do here at the Raw podcast, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, on YouTube, on Spotify, and giving us a review. We are also on Shots TV on Freeview channel 276. So check us out on there. As I say, we'll have build-up to that Stoke game and all the latest transfer news over on the SAFC section of the Sunderland Echo website.